Ina mana, ina reo, na tangara no na hoe wha, tēnā koutou katoa, tēnā koutou katoa. Greetings, and I'm Jane Bryson. I'm the Dean of the Wellington School of Business and Government at Te Herenga, Waka, Victoria University of Wellington. And just a really warm welcome to all the students and teachers here today, and to the Honourable Nicola Willis, Minister of Finance, who's taken time out of what I'm sure is an incredibly busy schedule to be with us today. It's great that we've got over 300 students joining us in person with their teachers, and I also take the opportunity to welcome students from across New Zealand who will view a recorded version of this event. So just a few words at the beginning about the Wellington School of Business and Government and the university. As a capital city business school, the Wellington School of Business and Government is embedded in the heart of Wellington City and draws on the expertise of business and government organisations around us to inform our teaching and our research. And in this slide, you can see one of our professors, Ilan Noy, who is standing up to his knees in the water on the Wellington waterfront, in the lagoon actually, it looks like. Now, Ilan is an economist who researches and teaches about the economic impact of disasters and climate change. He's one of a number of really interesting teaching staff and research staff at the university. The combination of business and government is what makes us a bit different as a business school, and means our students gain a valuable set of skills that prepares them for interesting and productive careers. You can mix your commerce degree with other degrees across the university, and we have new degrees about to be launched around environment and society that have commerce majors in them in sustainable management and the ethics of business. Our Papatia campus is able to host events like this at the Beehive, because the campus is just across the road here from the Beehive. You can see we're close to Parliament, and that means that we can engage with government on a regular basis. In Rutherford House across the road, the Wellington School of Business and Government plays an important role in educating the next generation of informed citizens like yourselves to go on to careers in business, the public sector, social enterprises and not-for-profit. We have a startup hub within Rutherford House of startup businesses, and we aim to prepare you also for contributing to policy debates about what's best for New Zealand and for the Asia-Pacific region. So we're uniquely placed to develop graduates that approach challenges and opportunities from a commercial, governance and societal perspective. But it's not all work in the lecture theatre. When you come to university, there's plenty to get involved in. The university has a diverse student profile which enriches the value of campus life. And we have over 150 different student clubs at the university, with some specific to the Wellington School of Business and Government. We've got some listed there. There's a case competition club where teams debate business cases against teams from other universities. There's an investment club. There's a consulting club, just to name a few. So there are events coming up at the university, and a key one that might be of interest to you all is the University Open Day on Friday the 23rd of August, with the Commerce Showcase happening at Rutherford House, but also, of course, there'll be events up on our Kelburn campus and at the Te Aro campus where architecture and design are located. So we really hope to see you here on the day at all our campuses, but particularly down here at Papatia. And course planning day is the next day, the 24th of August, which gives students a chance to plan out their degrees, which is really helpful, particularly if you're wanting to mix up the subjects in your degrees across different faculties and different discipline areas. We have a range of scholarships on offer, and the scholarships for 2025 are now open for applications, but your applications need to be in by the 2nd of September. And teachers who are interested in more details about Open Day or high school visits to our campus can connect with our staff after the session today, or if you're looking at the recorded version, you can see here the contact details. We have Jackie and Jose, they're over at the back of the room at the moment, but they'd be happy to organise a day for you. I know we have Papatoetoe College here today who've just been on a tour in the Pipitea campus with Jose, so they can tell you what it's like. And please just connect with us via any of our social media channels. We'd love to see you. And now to the main event. So the main event is a discussion of the recent budget. So months of planning go into the budget and weeks of dissection follow it. And there's no doubt it's a significant signal of the coalition government's plans and actions, what they've chosen to invest in and what they haven't, and always, I'm sure, a juggling act of priorities. So a very warm welcome to the Honourable Nicola Willis, the Minister of Finance, the Minister for the Public Service, the Minister for Social Investment, and Associate Minister of Climate Change. It's tiring just reading them all out.
The 4 children.
Prior to becoming an MP, Nicola held a number of senior management roles at New Zealand dairy cooperative Fonterra. She also served on the boards of Export New Zealand and policy think tank, the New Zealand Initiative. Nicola is a graduate of Te Herenga Waka, Victoria University of Wellington, with a first-class honours degree in English literature. She grew up in Wellington, and today she lives in Wellington with her husband Duncan and their 4 children. Thank you for speaking with us today, Minister, about the budget. The floor is yours. I think you'll speak, and then we'll move to questions afterwards.
Kia ora koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui ki a koutou, nau mai, haere mai, piki mai, ina mana, ina reo, e rangatira mā, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome to your place, your parliament, where decisions get made about your country and your future. It's great to have you here and to see so many of our young Wellingtonians engaged in the business of government and economics. Before I talk about the budget today, I thought that I'd take a step back and say, well, with everything that happens in the world, what are the bits that government controls and what are the bits that we have power over? Because I think it's pretty obvious to us all that governments don't control the weather, the massive climactic events that occur. We don't control what conflicts happen overseas. We don't control many things. But what we do have influence over, I think about as 3 main things. The first thing is decisions about how we tax people and how we spend that money. The second thing is we have control over what the government chooses to own and how it manages the things it owns, from hospitals to classrooms to trains. And the third thing is that we think about the rules and the laws that we set for our society and for our communities, the rules and regulations in which we all operate. So if we think about those 3 things, budgets are really about the first bit. They are about how much money we take from New Zealanders and their businesses and what we do with it. They're not so much about the rules that we set. For example, the decision we made to ban cell phones in your schools. That wasn't made in a budget, but an important decision nonetheless. So when we talk about budgets and the decisions that we make for tax and spending, I think there's a really interesting phenomenon that occurs, which is that if you think about an iceberg, you think of the very tip of that iceberg. Budgets traditionally only deal with that tip, which is to say there are billions and billions of dollars that get taxed and spent across the economy every year. But traditionally, in a budget, the government just announces decisions about the new spending that it's doing. And it doesn't talk so much about the iceberg underneath of the spending that goes on no matter what. So budgets have tended to be about the decisions the government makes about the extra spending that it does. And as we came into our first budget as a government, and as I thought about putting that together with our colleagues, before we made those decisions about the tip of the iceberg, we discussed as a cabinet and as a group of ministers what is actually the goal that we are coming to those decisions with. And the place that we start as a government is we want this country to be a much wealthier, more prosperous place. And the reason for that, I think, should be obvious to you economics and accounting and finance students, which is countries that are wealthier and more prosperous have better choices. Wealthier countries get to look after their environments better. Wealthier countries get to invest in their schools and hospitals more. Wealthier countries can offer their people better paid jobs, and they can ensure that there are better opportunities for people across their societies. So we start from the position that everything we do should be actually supporting the country to grow and be more prosperous, not just focusing on how we divide up the pie that we already have. And so when you think about New Zealand from that perspective, we've had a tough few years. We've experienced a cost of living crisis, which has been defined by 3 years of very high inflation. As you know, in New Zealand, we target inflation to come in below 3%, ideally to be at 2%. And we do that because without that stability, prices rise so fast that many people get caught in the wash and can't keep up with costs. I've no doubt that some of you have been experiencing that in your own family in recent times, where the bills keep piling up faster than the income to pay for them. So the governments actually have a job in terms of thinking about how we manage inflation. The other thing that's happened, of course, in New Zealand with really high inflation is that the Reserve Bank, who in our economy has responsibility for targeting inflation and getting it under control, has used its tool of lifting interest rates to try and get inflation under control. And that's been tricky too, because high interest rates hurt anyone who has borrowing, because they need to pay more for that borrowing, and they make it harder for businesses and others in the community to borrow. So what we've seen is that interest rates have gone very high, and the result of that has been that across our communities, many people have been doing it very tough. Businesses have been struggling as fewer customers have come in the door, and we have seen many families struggle to pay their mortgage. So I start there because for so long as New Zealand has really high inflation and really high interest rates, it's going to be hard to get our growth engine going. So as we came into this budget, one of the things our government was really focused on was how can we make sure that over these next few years we're not adding fuel to that inflation fire. Because if we make inflation worse, the Reserve Bank will have to crank the interest rates higher and there'll be more suffering as a result. So we started there. The other premise that we bore in mind that I think is really important is we thought about how much debt we would be creating for the future. Because the simple reality in New Zealand is that since 2019, the government hasn't run a budget that pays for itself. In every budget since 2019, the government has been borrowing to pay for the commitments it has made. Now, that's okay. Sometimes governments have to borrow. You know, when you're responding to a significant event like COVID-19 or a global financial crisis or floods, it's going to be appropriate to do some borrowing. The challenge for New Zealand is that we've done so much borrowing in recent times that our debt has got a lot higher than it used to be. It's crept up over 40% of the value of our overall economy, and our view is that we need to get that under control. We need to get that under control for a couple of reasons. One, because if we don't, you're going to spend your lifetimes trying to pay it back as taxpayers. And two, because if we don't sort it out, then when the next problem comes along, whether it's a cyclone or an earthquake, New Zealand might find it a lot harder to access the cash it needs to respond to that emergency. So our budget started from the position of we need to be really careful with how we spend money in this budget. And we made 5 key priorities within the money we were going to spend. The first was we looked across government and we saw example after example of things in recent years that the government had been spending New Zealanders' hard-earned money on that we didn't think represented best value for money. These were programs and initiatives that never went anywhere. This was huge amounts of funding that went into government agencies, and yet New Zealanders weren't reporting increased results. To give you a sense of this, government spending has increased around 80%. And so I want you to then think, in the past 6 or 7 years, some of you would have been quite young 6 or 7 years ago, what's improved 80%? Because there hasn't been an 80% reduction in crime, there hasn't been an 80% improvement in educational achievement, there hasn't been an 80% improvement in the waiting times for health, for surgery. So we looked at that and we said, actually, we've got a job to do as a government to find the money that's not going to its best purpose so that we can get more impact and more value. And we started from the view that New Zealanders have been paying, in real terms, much higher levels of tax in order to keep the spending going. So as you'll be aware, we campaigned on making adjustments to the tax system so that New Zealanders who've been going through a cost of living crisis can keep a bit more of their household income. And we made adjustments there. Now, these were the first tax adjustments that had been made in 14 years. And we thought were overdue and mean that many families, around 3.5 million New Zealanders, will have a bit more cash each fortnight as a result. And we see that as critically important because actually the most direct thing that any of us experience in the economy is the income we receive and the job we do. So we made changes to the tax system. The second area that we thought was really important was reprioritising money so that we could pay for that tax reduction without having to borrow for it. So we went on a big savings exercise across government. We went line by line through the things that government was spending on, and we identified those things that should be reprioritised. And that meant that we could fully fund our tax reduction through reprioritisation. The next thing that we looked to invest in was we thought, what are the things that New Zealanders believe are most important for the government to be delivering well and where we think additional resources are required? And we identified 4 key areas. Number 1, education, because actually the biggest predictor of how well an economy or a country will go in future is how well educated its people are. And so we always need to ensure we're investing in education, and I'll come back to that. The second area was our health system, because we have a view that ensuring that the health system can deliver for New Zealanders in their time of need, whether that's when you need to go to the emergency room having an accident or whether that's when your family member needs surgery, that requires constant investment in the health system to make sure it has the nurses and doctors needed to deliver services. The third area we think is critically important is keeping our communities safe, and that requires investment in law and order, our police, our prison service. And finally, the area we think is a priority for government spending, for new government spending, is infrastructure. That is, making sure we have the roads, we have the trains, we have the hospital buildings, the school buildings that are needed for our community to function well. So we were really clear at the outset of our budget that where we were going to be spending additional money, it needed to be very squarely prioritised towards those goals: education, health, law and order, infrastructure, and tax reduction. And that's what we put together in our budget. And so I'm very happy to answer all of your questions about the specific things that we did. One of the reflections that I would share with you is that sometimes it's the little things that actually can have the most impact. Let's talk about the health system, for example. In our budget, we committed an additional $16 billion. That is so much funding, it's kind of hard to get your head around. But many of you will have much more easily got your head around an initiative you might have heard of, which is our decision to put additional funding into the Gumboot Friday mental health program. This is a program targeted at you, targeted at young people, run by a non-government organisation, Mike King's Gumboot Friday, which has the promise that if you ring their service needing mental health support, needing counselling, they'll get you support within a week. And we love that model because we look at that and we say, well, actually getting good mental health support to young people is critically important. They've done a good job, let's fund them direct. Well, that only cost $24 million, which is a lot of money, but compared to $16 billion is obviously a tiny, tiny fraction. And the point I'm making to you is this, that in budgets, sometimes it is the small investments we choose to make that can turn the dial. And so the job that we do as ministers is to work to be very careful stewards of every dollar that we spend to make sure it has maximum impact. Because the thing is, a dollar that we invest over here that's doing an okay job but not a great job is a dollar we can't invest over here where it could be doing something amazing. And so that is the constant process that we are going through as ministers, is to identify where can money go to its biggest impact. So I'm happy to talk to you more about each of those areas and where we invested in this budget. But I do want to come to this final point before I invite your questions, which is where I started, which is actually our goal as a government is to grow the economy as a whole. Because when we look at what really matters to people, whether you can get a job, whether you will get a pay increase, whether there is the resources available for investment, we know that all of those things are made easier if the economy grows faster. So we are humble as a government that it's not me who's going to go out tomorrow and come up with the exciting new business idea that incorporates AI and leads to a global exporter that makes money for New Zealand. That will probably be done instead by a clever entrepreneur or a clever business that decides to take a risk. So fundamentally as a government, what we need to do is create conditions in which businesses and entrepreneurs and individuals and workers think, yep, that looks okay. I want to build things and make things in New Zealand. I want to invest in New Zealand. I want to employ people in New Zealand. So we take really seriously our job, which is to set those fundamentals right, to make sure that our budget prioritises well, is careful about inflation, careful about interest rates, and puts dollars in the right areas. So we put together our budget. I delivered it several weeks ago now. There are so many things in it. I thought best to answer your questions about those priorities rather than talk to you ad infinitum about it. But I would just finish in saying that as young people who are learning about how finance and economics works, I think you have a critical role, because you should never sit back and think decisions about New Zealand are being made by other people without you. You are absolutely part of it, and I think the challenge for all of us as decision makers is to listen to you about your priorities and choices, but also to understand that this is an amazing country, and I want you to feel optimistic about it, because I know that there has been a lot of talk in recent times about the challenges in our economy, and that's totally real. But if you look at New Zealand from anywhere else in the world, we've got it going on, because actually this is a place with abundant food, it is a place with abundant natural resources, safe borders, surrounded by an ocean, great trading relationships, clever people. And so my optimism is that we can grow this country, we can do more things and better things, and we'll do it with people like you giving your best to it. So my final message about our budget would be, budgets are one stepping stone, economies are far larger than a budget, and governments are far larger than a budget. They are a step in the right direction, and the rest is ultimately up to New Zealanders. So with that, I'll take your questions.
Right, everyone. So the Minister will take questions. I have a few prepared questions that have been sent in. If you need me to ask them while you're warming up, to ask your question. And I do need to say you need to be aware that we are recording this session. So your voice will be captured, but no image of you will be captured because the camera is focused on the Minister, of course. So just be aware of that as you ask your question. So first of all, I'll open it to the floor. Hands up if anyone has a question of the first question. Excellent. I'll bring you the microphone.
Hello, I'm from Sacred Heart. My name's Victoria. What would you say about the fact that all of the things that you have cut from the budget, such as the public service workers, the free public transport and the prescription fees, along with the tax cut, actually seem to be benefiting, creating more wealth inequality and benefiting the rich more than they do the poor?
I just completely reject it. It's not true. That is not a fact. And so I think one of the things that is really important in politics is that we do establish facts. So, in terms of our tax package, we were really careful that we wanted to make sure our tax package targeted the people who we thought most needed tax relief, and we identified that to be lower and middle income families. So when we designed the tax package, we designed it to reach them more. So there are a few components to that. The first is that when we adjusted the tax brackets, what that meant was that people on lower incomes would end up paying lower rates of tax than they do at the moment. Take the example of a minimum wage worker working full-time, 42 hours a week. Because of inflation, over recent years, they've been pushed into higher tax brackets and they're paying higher rates of tax. They now pay 30 cents in the dollar if they're working 42 hours a week. We don't think that's fair. We think that if you're a lower income earner, you should actually be at a lower rate of tax. So the adjustments we've made mean that a minimum wage worker, if they're working that many hours a week, will now pay 17.5 cents in tax for every dollar that they earn. The second thing that we did, in addition to adjusting the tax brackets to be fairer on low and middle income workers, was we ensured that we were offering a top-up, an independent earner tax credit for those earning lower amounts of income. That was to top up the value of their tax relief. The third thing we did was we identified that if you're a lower and middle income family with children, then you've got an even greater need for relief, and so we increased the size of the tax credit you get if you're a working family on a low income. And the fourth thing that we did was we identified that families on middle to lower incomes with young children face particularly high costs, and so we introduced a family boost childcare rebate so that they could get rebates for the sometimes exorbitant childcare fees that they have to pay. The point I'm making to you is this: just because someone on Instagram says that our budget is for the wealthy doesn't mean it's true. And I challenge you, when you see those assertions, go and decide for yourself with your own intelligence and your own capability whether the facts support the assertion made. Because we've been extremely careful in our budget to target lower and middle income families. The other thing I would say is this. You are right, absolutely, that we have made some tough decisions in our budget to reprioritise money from some areas into others. Absolutely, that is the case, and that has led to job reductions across the public service. The flip side of that is this. Our public service numbers have grown dramatically in recent years, up 30%. And you have to ask yourself, have New Zealanders seen the increase in service to them as a result? And the second thing I would say about that is that as government, we actually have a job to do to make sure that before we take New Zealanders' money and invest it in hiring someone, that we can look that New Zealand family in the eye and promise them that that will be of more value than them keeping that money to pay for their children's swimming lessons, to pay for their groceries. And we're not sure that that balance has been struck in recent years. And finally, I tell you, I was in Wellington at a breakfast recently, and someone said to me, Nicola, thank you so much for making some adjustments in the public service, because now in my business I can finally hire skilled people. It has been so hard to get them to work for my business in Wellington because they've always chosen to work in the public service instead. My point is simply that there are jobs across our community, not just jobs in government agencies.
Kia ora, Mr. Thank you for that. I'd just like to ask a question that follows up from that question. You like to speak of facts, right, and dismiss this question as being based on something off Instagram, implying sort of being able to be misled from that, I mean based on facts. So the tax cuts for my own personal household, I earn close to double the income of my partner, unfortunately. I received $40 a fortnight as a tax cut. Her, receiving close to half my income, only received $11 per fortnight. How does that not increase inequality? Because that is a factual example.
Sorry, I'd have to understand your personal circumstances. So is your point that there's unequalness between you and your partner in terms of the income you earn?
The key point is, although I earn more than her, I therefore receive a higher tax cut than she does. So I receive more financial support than she does because I earn a higher income. My question is, how does that not in of itself further income inequality if I, earning a higher income, receive more support than she does on a lower income?
Well, I imagine in your household you share your income, so we do, and it's traditional for governments to look at...
The question is on a broad level, though. There's an example of two people. There are other people out there who are not in the same incomes, but those earning lower
incomes. Are you a teacher
incomes.
Or a student?
Minister, I'm trying to support the question that was based on the fact that you've tried to negate from. Thank you.
I think the point that your teacher is making is that in his household there is one earner who's earning more than another, and therefore they earn more, and therefore they pay more tax, and therefore in their case they are getting more tax reduction. That is true. And the point that we have made, and that I am making, is that therefore we want to make sure that when we structure a tax package, we're ensuring that those on lower and middle income are actually given good incentives to work, are given good incentives to take a promotion. We don't think that people who earn more should necessarily be punished. We think that actually it's great that there are people out there working hard and getting promotions. And so I accept that there can be a philosophical view on that. But I would also say this to you. If you look at the child poverty report which we put together, that shows that as a consequence of our budget, child poverty as measured by the after housing measure will be lower than it would otherwise be. And that is a result of the way that we have structured our package. I think, the debate we're having here is there are choices. And our view is that the choices that have been made in recent times have meant that working people have had to pay higher rates of tax. An average taxpayer has gone from paying 15% of their income in tax to 20%. And we say at a certain point you have to say, do you just keep spending more money as a government and taxing people more to pay for it? Or do you make it fairer and let people keep a bit more of their own money? I choose that side of the argument. You may choose the other side of the argument.
I would like to ask, is now the best time for tax relief, as it may drive inflation further so people may actually end up suffering more?
Hey, great question, because If we were to do tax relief and we didn't fund it responsibly, it could potentially be inflationary. So that was one of the challenges that we approached in our budget. What we did with our tax package was that we costed it out, and then we identified the full way of funding it through a series of initiatives to offset the cost of it. And the advice that I received from the Treasury, who are learned economists in an independent government agency, was that where tax relief is fully funded through savings and reprioritisations, then, on balance, it is disinflationary. And the reason for that is this, if I can simplify it really baldly, which is if you're a government agency and I give you $1 to spend this year, you're definitely going to spend it because that's what you're required to do. If you're an individual taxpayer and I give you $1 to spend, a lot of the time you'll spend that. But in some cases, you might choose to save it or use it to pay down your debt. And so what that means is that tax relief, if funded through offsetting savings and reprioritisation, puts less cash into the economy than would otherwise have been the case. And that's why we were so careful to fund the tax package in the way that we did. Thank you for your question.
Voters in Wellington have repeatedly voted in support of politicians who support initiatives such as Wellington Light Rail and other pro-pedestrian, pro-public transport positions that your government has now decided not to fund. How do you explain to the voters of Wellington why you have rejected their democratic decisions?
Well, we haven't rejected the democratic decisions. Wellington continues to have democratically elected councillors, council and members of parliament. Actually, our budget reflects ongoing funding for the subsidisation of buses, of trains, and in fact a large amount of money in our budget to fund new trains for Wellington commuter rail. So I reject your assertion that we don't support public transport. We do. We think it's important. And in fact, in the investments that we are prioritising for the future, we want to ensure that New Zealand and Wellington specifically have the basic roading infrastructure needed to support buses and public transport. Actually, some of you will have to go through the Mount Vic tunnel each day to get to school, and you will know that it's not just cars that get caught in that traffic. It actually has an impact across the network as well, and it snarls out buses as well. So our view is that better roading infrastructure supports a couple of things. It actually supports better public transport networks, but it also supports people to use electric vehicles and lower emission forms of vehicle. I don't think it's fair to say that everyone in Wellington wanted light rail. The evidence for the light rail got discussed for 6 years under the last government. They promised to fund it and deliver it. They never did. And ultimately that was because it was very difficult to put together a business case that demonstrated there would be enough people who wanted to catch it. And so we're getting on with other projects. Those are choices that we campaigned on. And I think, democracy is ultimately that the government was elected.
Hey Minister, I'm a student from Wellington College. My name's Nessie. So this is our question. What is the government doing to prevent the brain drain, given that currently our salaries and wages are unfair compared to Australia? Just a lot of our skilled workers are heading overseas and we want to keep them here because we want them.
It's such a great question because it's one of the things that really concerns me. If we want New Zealand to succeed, we need talented, capable, hard-working people to want to live here. And if New Zealanders feel that the way to pursue their aspiration or their ambition is to move to another country, then that is bad for all of us. And so ultimately, the view that our government takes is that if we want to make this a great place to be, we have to make this a place where you do get rewarded for your effort, for your work, that you do feel you can get ahead, that this is an economy that's growing, that provides you good choices and opportunities, and that this is a country where you get good services, good schools, good hospitals, all of those sorts of things. And so I am very concerned with the number of people who have been leaving, But I also understand it, which is that we've had 3 years of a cost of living crisis, and many people have been doing it very tough. And so for me, I just find it motivating, which is that's why we have to every day as a government work hard to strengthen the economy and to make sure that this is a place where services are better and people can get ahead.
Thank you.
You talked about controlling debt, but according to NewsHub, you were increasing borrowing by $12 billion, which equates to the bulk of the tax cut package. How does that actually help people?
Well, look, it's a really good question. There's two parts to that. The first is, as I said, our tax package is fully funded by offsetting measures, so we're not borrowing for tax relief. The situation that we have inherited is one of an economy that has been slowing down dramatically, and many of you will be aware of that. You will have seen the headlines in recent months about recession, about very low growth. For 4 of the past 6 quarters, the New Zealand economy has been going backwards. It's been shrinking. And what that has meant is that even since we came into office, the economists, the forecasters, the statisticians have been looking at the New Zealand economy, and they've concluded that the recession, the downturn, started earlier than they thought, was worse than they thought, and therefore was likely to persist for longer. So what the forecasters then do is they take that analysis of the economy as a whole and they project it forward and they say, well, what does that mean for the government's revenue? And the simple fact is this: when an economy is slowing down a lot, it means that companies earn less, so they pay less tax, and it means that there is less tax being collected in the economy as a whole. So regardless of who is in government and whatever choices they make, they would have encountered a situation in this budget where there is less revenue into the future. Now, you're right. At that juncture, there is a choice. What the government could do is it could say, well, we don't want to do any more borrowing, so instead we're going to dramatically reduce our spending. We're going to reduce spending on hospitals, on schools and law and order. And we thought that that was the wrong thing to do, and I stand by that decision. Instead, what we did was we said, well, given this situation, we're going to spend less as a whole. And so what we did was we revisited the spending plans of the previous Labour-led government, and we said that's not viable anymore, because we were told if you stuck to those big spending plans, the books would remain in deficit for a decade until 2031. And we said, well, that's not okay, so we will spend less. So we reduced the spending down both this year from 3.5 billion to 3.2 billion in additional spending, but also in future years. And so the impact of that is that we can now forecast we will get the books back in balance by the 27-28 financial year, several years earlier than would have otherwise been the case, and we can reduce the amount of borrowing so that overall we're spending $5.5 billion less. So yes, there's been an economic downturn, and yes, that has an impact on the books, but we have taken responsible decisions. I think to have gone further would have meant cuts to public services that I don't think New Zealanders would have wanted and that I don't think were necessary.
Hi, my name's Hayden, and I'm a first-year commerce student at Victoria. And my question is, how does the government intend to address inflation while simultaneously boosting economic output? And how will the government plan to achieve a budget surplus in operating terms?
So in terms of achieving a surplus, that's, as I just discussed, that we see a few components to that. One is trimming back the amount of additional spending that we do in future budgets, which means that we can forecast a surplus in future. Obviously, as I said earlier, as I keep repeating that theme, it's also about if we grow the economy faster, then of course we'll have more revenue, and that would allow us to return to surplus faster too. And I always mention that because if we just get blindly focused on the spending and the revenue side, we forget that if we grow New Zealand, then actually we have better choices. Your second question is about growing economic output. And what we know, as I said, is that in recent times the economy has been very off the boil. and economic output has, by many measures, been going backwards. If you look at per capita GDP, which you guys all understand, is a measure of how much our economy, how big our economy is on a per population basis, we've been shrinking for about 18 months quite dramatically. And so our job that we see is to drive that economic output by increasing the productive capacity of the economy. We have a productivity plan in which we identify 5 key things needed to achieve that. The first is better education and skills. It's a real problem that we have had lower education and skills. The second is ensuring that we are delivering infrastructure that supports growth. The third is making sure that we have a better environment for doing business with less red tape that allows people to invest with more certainty. The fourth is driving overseas trade and capital flows from around the world. And the final piece is making sure that our science and innovation system supports businesses to innovate and grow.
We've only got time for one more brief question. I'll take the one at the back.
Do you have an Instagram?
Absolutely, and can I just say, it is totally fine to be on Instagram. I'm on Instagram. In fact, I'm being hassled today by Brian Tamaki about some of the people I follow on Instagram. It is totally fine to be on Instagram. I think what I'm just saying is, be critical thinkers. It's highly likely that you could fact-check anything I said today, and you could go and find people who would have an alternative view. That is great. That is what we should have in a democracy, is a large range of views. What I'm encouraging you to do is, before you accept an assertion or an argument, go and find out some information of your own, listen to the other side of the story. I'm passionate about the fact that for our democracy to work, we need people to have views that are formed through as much information as possible and with critical thinking. And if you're on Instagram, the thing I would encourage you to do is to make sure that you're also listening to the people who disagree with the people you agree with, because it challenges us and it makes us think better and it makes us more critical thinkers. And I take that upon myself too, to challenge myself and my own views. And I think it's actually a really important part of government, because the general rule that I have is, if a decision comes to the desk of a minister, it's not an easy decision. There will be views on both sides, and what we need to do is weigh those views up. So get your information from a range of sources and challenge yourself to think.
Can we thank the Minister? So, on behalf of everyone, Minister, I would like to thank you very much for your discussion of the budget, your openness to engage with the voters of tomorrow gathered in this room, and your hosting of us all here in the Beehive. Thank you so very much. It's been a really interesting session, and thank you to all the students and teachers who sent in questions and who actually asked them in the room. And those who will be watching the recording. I hope that you've enjoyed it, taking part in a little bit of democracy. And come and challenge your mind at Victoria University of Wellington. We'd love to see you at the Wellington School of Business and Government in the future. So kia ora and mā te wā.